How can vocals, the most important part of your mix, be so hard to get right? And then after you tweak it a bunch during the early morning rehearsal, their voice warms up and is different during the service. Today I'm going to show you how I get vocals dialed in during sound check with EQ, compression, de-essing, and effects. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. I'm here to help you make every worship mix an enjoyable one and get great sounds fast. Before I start messing with the EQ and the compression on a singer, I'm going to make sure that they can hear themselves well in their monitor mix first. If they're using a personal monitor mixer, I'm going to make sure that they know how to use it properly, and then they've got it dialed in so that they can hear themselves well enough to sing well. If their monitor mix isn't great, it's going to create problems that we can't fix on our end. If my front of house console is feeding their monitor mixer, I'm going to make sure that there's enough gain when they're getting started so that they can hear themselves properly and get their mix dialed in. As far as what processing I send them, I try to only send the high-pass filter if it's possible. I don't want my EQ or compression changing the way that their monitor mix feels. And I really want to have the flexibility to compress them a lot if I need to, and not have it mess up the balance of their dynamics. If you have a separate monitor console, you can add a little bit of EQ and dynamics to help them, but don't go crazy with it. If they need help learning how to set up their monitor mixer, you can send them this tutorial up here. Now, even though the vocals are the most important part of the mix, I don't start with them. I want to give them time to get their monitor mix dialed in and for them to warm up. The times when I do start with vocals, especially if it's an early morning sound check, their voice sounds way different between sound check and the service. If you try to EQ them before they're warmed up, you'll end up chasing your tail and having to redo it all over again anyway. So for me, I start with the band, then do the vocals after they're warmed up. You can see a tutorial of how I set up the band mix over here. So now that I've got the band mix squared away and my vocals are warmed up, now I can start to push them up. I double check my preamp to make sure that the levels are fine there and that I'm not clipping and that they've got enough juice still. If I've got to make a change and it's going to affect their monitor mix, I be sure to let them know before I change it. So before I even listen to the vocal, I've already got my high pass filter up and I've cut around 250 to take care of the proximity effect. I've got my low mid band set around 500, but I haven't pulled down the gain yet. I'm going to listen to this and fine tune it as I'm listening to the vocal. With this band, I'm trying to cut the resonance that makes the vocal feel cluttered. Now, at this point, I'm going to want to hear the vocal both at a low verse and at a big chorus because I'm going to start to dial in my compression and the high mid band on the EQ. Sometimes compression by itself can tame the vocal enough for those big parts, but other times the tone changes so much that I've got to pull out a little bit of high mids to keep it from being harsh. In glory and majesty stand alone. In glory and majesty stand alone. You stand alone. You stand alone. In glory and majesty stand alone. In glory and majesty stand alone. In glory and majesty stand alone. You stand. Now you've got to remember that these vocals have to be out in front of a big full mix, so if it's painful at all, it's gonna hurt somebody. This is another reason why I get my band mix up and full first before I start to EQ my vocals. Now with compression, I'm looking for two different things. I'm looking to control the macro dynamics, or the way that it changes from section to section, verse to chorus to bridge, stuff like that. The other thing that I'm looking to do is try to even out the phrases so that even the quietest parts of the phrase can come up and be heard and out in front of the mix. Now, you've got to be careful that you don't over-compress the vocals. There are a few things to look out for. One is that it sounds small when it should sound big, and it sounds too loud when it should be quieter. Another way to tell that you've gone too far is that the breaths are louder than the words. We give you glory. Now, if you've got a really dynamic vocalist, you can try to set your ratio a little bit lighter, 2 or 2.5 to 1. This is going to help them get some compression when they're singing at a low or normal volume, but it's not going to totally squash them when they go full tilt and they're pinning your hair, bro. If a singer has a more normal dynamic range, I'll set the compressor to about 4 to 1 with a soft knee. Now that they're compressed, the S's and T's might start to get out of control. This is when I'm going to add the de-esser. Now, not every console has a de-esser on it, and it kind of bugs me, but I do love de-essing when I have the chance. It's especially helpful when you have a really bright condenser microphone, so you get that airy sound on the vowel sounds, but then the S's and T's are too much. Instead of using EQ to dip the high frequencies and losing all that airy sound on the vowels, you can use a de-esser to compress just the S's and T's. We lift your name up, Jesus be glorified. When setting the threshold, make sure that it's grabbing those S's, T's, and maybe even F sounds, but it's not compressing on the vowel sounds. That top end on the vowel sounds is airy goodness, and you don't want to lose any of that. Now, different engineers will argue where you put the deesser in the chain, but I like to put it earlier in the chain rather than later. My reasoning is that your S's and T's are going to be about the same level, no matter if you're singing loud or singing quiet. So if you can get it before it's compressed, you can get it the most consistent sound on those S's and T's. Now, after I've got my singers compressed and de-essed well, I'm going to set my output gain so that the fader's living right around 0 at a good spot for the level in the mix. This gives me the most fine-tuning, the most control over each vocal. If you've got a singer that's both singing background vocals and lead on some songs, you'll want to set the fader so that it's about -5 when they're singing background vocals so that you can push it up to be out in front of the mix when they're leading a song. Now, if you're compressing a lot, you'll still have to ride the faders between the sections, so don't be afraid to use a DCA or a group to pull that back for different parts of the song. Side note, if you're still learning to use a compressor and hear what it's doing, it's important to try to match the level of the compressor when it's both on and off with the makeup gain. When the compressor is pushing down the level and then you bypass it, it's going to get louder all of a sudden. And it's really hard to compare the sound of two signals when they're at a different level. So after you set a general setting on your compressor, try to fine-tune the output gain by bypassing it and putting it back in the circuit to see if you can hear the difference when they're at about the same average level. Now after they're balanced, compressed, and feeling good, that's when I'm going to start to add my effects. My go-to reverb for vocals is about a 2.2 second hall with about 90 seconds of pre-delay. The pre-delay gives me a good amount of space between the vocal and the reverb time really depends on the room. Now, another consideration is that if you're doing a lot of slow songs, a longer reverb is going to sound better then, but I'm not usually switching reverb times between songs. I also like to dial in a delay, and I usually set it to the quarter note and just tap in the rhythm that I want it to be. I'll put links to my reverb and delay tutorials down in the description below. So that's how I get started with vocals during soundcheck. Hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video. I'm here to help you make every worship mix an enjoyable one. You can count on that.